You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Are you a diehard comic book collector?
Or maybe a lapsed fan?
Maybe even someone who has never picked up a comic book in their life. Hi, I'm Remso Martinez.
And I'm Mark Claire. Every single Wednesday at the Second Print Comics podcast, Remso and I take a deep dive into the storylines, character arcs, moments, and events that made us the fans we are today.
Tune in every Wednesday for new episodes available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever else podcasts are available.
Check out more from the Second Print Comics podcast at secondprintcomics.com.
Prepare yourself. You're on the run with Remso W. Martinez.
Stephen Kent, this is one hell of a year for you, man.
I'm tired.
You look like you're alive, but like waiting for the weekend. It's like that song, "Working for the Weekend" or whatever the hell it is. You're the embodiment.
Everybody's working for the weekend. I only associate that with Derek Zoolander.
Oh my gosh! Now I'm gonna have that face in my mind the entire time. That and the Steel Cobra deal.
Blue Steel,
where it's just the stare.
It's working for the weekend when the models blow themselves up right at the gas station. Yeah? Or am I confusing that with one of the other 80s songs?
I think that's it. I went on a rant the other day. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever heard the song "Who Can It Be Now" by the Police?
Yeah.
Who
can it be now?
Yeah, that is some 80s trippery right there. That and Guy George songs. And, you know, to a large degree, as much as I watch it now with modern eyes and they all kind of freak me out, I watch current music videos, not as often because I'm like a 26-year-old boomer. But, like, at least then they were willing to try things out. Now I'm, I bet they're still trying to do it, but, like, there was a unique flair to that era where they were willing to be weird, and I love it.
I mean, did you see the completely reinvigorated, like, not 4D, I don't know my terms, 4K, Rick Astley Never Gonna Give You Up music video? It was remastered.
It seemed almost unreal.
It is so trippy to see the Rick Astley Never Gonna Give You Up video look like a modern music video. It warps your entire perception of reality. And if you've not seen it, look up the remastered video. It's wild.
David Hasselhoff. I've never listened to any of his songs, but I do know he was big in Germany at one point.
David Hasselhoff had songs?
He had songs. He went on after Baywatch to go be a pop star in Europe.
I missed that part. Yeah.
Everyone in America did. But
I just thought he was SpongeBob's transportation back to Bikini Bottom.
He was, but there's this big 20-year gap between Baywatch and when he helps out SpongeBob. He was big in Europe, especially in Germany, and he wrote a bunch of how K-pop music has English slang thrown in there. Mm-hmm. He did the same thing, but in German. So it's highly aggressive. But then he'll talk about going out and skipping on warm summer days and stuff. It was really weird. And he basically got looped into this film student's big project that got turned into a sci-fi Indiegogo movie called Kung Fury. And he actually wrote and produced and starred in the music video for it. And it looks like a trashy 80s action movie, but it was done 2 years ago. And it's one of those things where it's just we could rewrite history with this stuff if we wanted to use that power for evil.
I would have you gifted with that power because you would do good things with it.
I would put so many dinosaurs in World War II.
Have you you live in Northern Virginia along with me? Have you ever been to the Civil War dinosaur museum experience?
Dinosaur Land.
Yeah, Dinosaur Land. It's out near the place where Robert E. Lee is buried. It's Natural Bridge.
Yeah,
Natural Bridge, Virginia. So this is a Civil War sort of not wax museum, but it's an outdoor experience with statues and scenes of the Civil War with dinosaurs included.
Watching Andrew Jackson using a robot arm to strangle a T-Rex was one of the most metal things.
And,
I
and
went
the
there
dinosaurs were with the Union, right? The dinosaurs were put forward by the Union to squash the South. It's this really weird place.
Dude, it was I went there sober. So I went there about a year ago during like the height of the crazy summer of 2020 when everyone thought I would die leaving my neighborhood. So I went there like in the middle of the day. I'm thinking, maybe I should get really kind of screwed up before walking in. But I walked in completely sober. I was like the only one there. And like it's funny because that's the thing about the South. Like they have like this quirky ability to like make fun of themselves in a way that I don't typically see of my more northern compatriots. And it's one of those places where it's like if you go there expecting like a history tour, you're not getting it at all.
I fully intend to go back and do edibles before walking through.
I feel like that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to do it. It's just a question of when and where I'm going to lodge afterwards.
Yeah, you could sleep underneath a brontosaurus. I think they'd let you sleep on the property.
I had 2 gummies and then I woke up the next day in between Robert E. Lee and a bronchiosaurus.
That's a great way to start the day. So on to some serious stuff. At what point did you consider drinking while writing your book? Because every author hits that point.
I do drink while writing on Thursday afternoons, so I really do prefer to go out to one of the local bars on Thursday afternoons while I'm working on how the Force can fix the world, and at least get two beers deep. It loosens you up a little bit.
Did the others let you keep the title?
The editors expanded the title, so it was originally going to be How the Force Can Fix America, and the book is still very America-centric, but the publisher wanted it to be How the Force Can Fix the World, so, it can be marketed towards everybody, maybe be put into other languages. And I'm supposed to try and work in some anecdotes about other countries, but, like for me to do that kind of stuff, like I'm not an international affairs guy. I have to like hit Wikipedia and be like, what kind of revolution happened in this country so we can sell a book there? But yeah, that's been some of the places where editorial feedback has come in.
And so far, how's the process been? Because you and I spoke about it when we got a beer like 6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
And you were still trying to work through like, I think the first 4 chapters, you were able to hustle through that. How have things been since with the process?
Well, they've been going. The book is due in 2 weeks. On May 15th, I've got to turn in the manuscript. Now, I think the way it tends to go is they don't expect any of their authors to ever turn anything in on time, but I'm considering that not to be an option. I'm turning it down to May 15th or bust. So I've got 2 more weeks to finish up just 1 more chapter and the introduction to the book. And the process has been good. I think mostly just like you end up with like word salad. I mean, I've got like the goal of writing 5,000 word chapters and I end up with 12. And then I realize there's no narrative flow. It's just a couple of paragraphs from when I woke up one day to write, a couple of paragraphs from the next day I woke up to write, and they're not connected at all. Because it's really hard to find time to write because you wake up and you've got to kind of like reread what you did the day before so it makes sense, and then you can pick up where you left off. And then by the time you've done that, it's an hour wasted or you're gone, and then you've got to do your real life job. So it's been challenging, but somehow I've made it through.
Yeah, I feel like with writing a book specifically, it's one of the few times in your life where you really get to fight your inner monologue of things, because you have this idea for how you want the story to flow. You have the idea of a lot of the technical aspect you want to put in to at least make sure that you're doing everything correctly. And then when you actually put it on paper, you're constantly fighting yourself because you never know if it's good enough. And I will say that's the one thing that I learned myself self-publishing 2 books. It's one of the reasons why I say that some people are not meant to self-publish. Some people are meant to published traditionally. It's because the one thing that I struggled with a lot myself, and this came with a lot of, pros and cons, was the fact that my first book I didn't set a deadline for. I think if I had, a lot of things could have been fixed. A lot of things could have happened a little bit sooner, which would have been better for when it originally released. But when I did the second book myself, I was kind of like my own worst enemy. It was like, wake up, dumbass. It's time to get 600 words in before you go to lunch. And then I put myself on that calendar. So I gave myself 9 months and I got it done in like 8 months. So then I spent, a month kind of just leaving it alone before I sent it off to the editors I paid. But it's one of those things where it's like, you have to just trust that you've done your best. You put in the best work that you can under the constraints of work, family, and everything else. And that ultimately, that by the time you send it off to editors, they're going to find mistakes.
And I did actually what you suggested, which was bringing in an outside editor and paying them to review your work. So I was mostly going off charity for a while. I'd send one chapter to one person, be like, hey, give me some notes on this, some feedback. But most people will tell you, this is amazing. This is great. What an awesome essay this is. And I'm just kind of like, all right, mom or sister or friend, like, I really need you to tell me, actually, son, this makes no sense. But no one will tell you that. So the best thing to do really is to find somebody who is like an editor. Maybe they do it professionally and have them spend some time with it. So now I've got somebody like $20 an hour right now going through my chapter on redemption because it's sprawling. It's just this sprawling essay. And it needs somebody to go in and tell me like, this doesn't make any sense. You need to connect A to C a little bit better and chop off all of B. Like, that's really important to do. So I have found it to be incredibly worth it. So I appreciate that advice from you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of those little things that a lot of people don't really think of because, I had a lot of people who offered to do it for free because they wanted to be nice. I would still Venmo them like, $30, $50 if I knew it was going to take them a couple of weeks, because at least then if they get the money, they feel a little bit more obligated. So it was me kind of coercing them in that sense of, oh, well, I'm going to give this to you. And if you don't want it, you can send it back, but it's yours as a thank you. It kind of forced them to do that because otherwise
you get what you pay for.
Yeah. Because otherwise, like, I don't think anyone I ever sent the first couple chapters of my first book to ever read it.
Yeah.
I feel like they just kind of like skimmed it and they got the premise, but I'm looking for, like, I know there are mistakes there. I just need you to find them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they will. I think, writing is hard. Writing a book and writing over 1,000 words is incredibly difficult. I mean, a freaking op-ed that you would send in for publication, you worked in op-eds previously, like, it's 800 words. That's so short. Like, that is such a small burst of words and opinion. And when you're talking about a chapter of a book, you're talking about 5,000 to 6,000 words, 8,000 if you're talking about really wordy chapters. And most people just look at it and I think they're just like, oh, I'm impressed by this. You can articulate yourself. And that's just, you gotta seek a specialist if you really want help curbing your writing and making it as good as possible for general audiences.
What was the mindset, the mindset shift for you going from, knowing how to properly do an op-ed to really getting to flesh your stuff out in full chapters?
That's interesting. So I know that there was a mindset shift. I think it was mostly just not editing myself as much as I normally would, because when you're writing an op-ed, you really do have to make sure that every sentence that you put in has absolute utility. You're talking about 800 words. That is barely more than a page on a Word document. It's very, very small. But with a book, you really can let it breathe and you can make the points that you want to make. So I think the mindset difference is this. You spend several hours writing and you do not edit while you write. You do stream of consciousness writing, and then you go back over it later and go, this part can go. That made no sense. Cut it out. But you don't edit while you write. Well, I think while you do an op-ed, you really do got to like think it through every step of the way. Writing a book, you'll never get done if you are editing whilst writing.
Absolutely. And that's one of those things that, I mean, just from a technical aspect, you're going to save a lot of time. And as you mentioned, I would much rather eliminate word count than really focus on having to add whole entire sections to it. Because if it's just all there, then I could piece it together. If I have to go in and make the pieces, that's the hard part. Yeah.
And my editor at the publisher, Hachette Center Street, was really happy with long chapters. They wanted 5,000 words, which, sorry, I've turned in like 8,000 to 7,000 word or 7,000 to 8,000 word chapters in most cases. But They don't mind it if you've broken it up with subheads. So this is, writing 4 paragraphs, and then you've got kind of a bold subtitle. It's like, the Force can work for anybody. And then you do 4 more paragraphs, and then you go lessons from Boba Fett. And then you do 4 more. And like, if you just break things up and give the reader an opportunity to put their bookmark in and go to sleep for the night, take a break, it doesn't matter if your chapter is sprawling. You just need to provide stopping and starting points. So that format has been so helpful. And I only learned that by reading other people's books. I did not know to use subheads at all. But I picked up 3 books in 2020 that I loved, or I loved the authors, and I wanted to read how they write. And by reading how they write, I learned to write because I didn't know how to do it before.
And that's one of those things that a lot of first-time writers get tripped up on because they stop reading other people's books because they don't want other people's writings affecting them. And I think that's a catch-22. So, like, with How to Succeed, it was historical fiction. I stopped reading other historical fiction. I didn't read any book that was relating to mine, but I still kept reading. So, I would read a lot of fiction. I would read comedy. I would read, horror, stuff like that, because at least it was getting my gears turning to what other people are writing in different settings.
Yeah.
I didn't want to end up stealing what another author wrote or trying to feel like I have to measure up to another author. So that was one of those things that, it is one of those things where it's like you have to stop reading some stuff, but you should not stop reading because it's almost like getting ready for a 5K. You have to do a bunch of smaller runs to get ready for the big run.
Yeah, there's a sort of an example in my journey writing How the Force Can Fix the World, where my favorite of the books that I picked up in 2020 to kind of do homework to figure out how the heck to write a book, I picked up Matt Iglesias's 1 Billion Americans. This is one of the guys who founded Vox. He's now out on his own because Vox got way too PC for him to do his work. So in 1 Billion Americans, Matt Iglesias has a writing style where he really tries not to justify things that most common sense or most people would consider to be common sense, like having kids, that having kids makes you happy, right? That having kids is a thing that gives people purpose in life. You could write an essay like debating whether or not that is true, or you could go with the common sense and go, having kids is good. You should have kids because it will give you direction in life. Matt Iglesias writes very to the point and just goes, it is good. Therefore, you should do it. And when I read all of his book, I went, oh, I really like the way that he does this. He doesn't feel a need to debate with himself on the page. He says, I believe this to be good and you should too. And so in my writing, I started doing that. And I really like the way that it came across, but it's mimicry. And you got to be like really careful about how you go about doing that because some of my chapters have it and some don't. And that's a very big style problem that I've got to reconcile in my editing process in the next month.
Yeah, I mean that is one of those things that I had to deal with because for my second book, I read a lot of Hunter Thompson. I read Better Than Sex, and I also read Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. And the one thing that I realized was that I would catch myself. It's like, this isn't how I would write something. This is how he would write it. And to an extent, like what I would do is I would just kind of continue with the thought process and then I would edit later and then kind of rewrite it myself. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's not good or bad as long as it sounds genuine to the content. The one interesting you brought up was kind of like this assumed knowledge for the reader. And I actually like I defend that style of writing. A lot of people are like, well, you should definitely show the other side. And you should when you're doing more of a research-focused project. But for his book specifically, and I haven't read it, I just watched his interview on Joe Rogan about it. I still need to pick it up. For the most part, it's like if you're going and reading his book, you already have a certain amount of assumed knowledge on the subject matter of population scale and immigration and things like that. So it would almost be a waste of time for him to go back and try and do all that extra stuff. It would be almost like an extra book. Whereas with yours, I mean, I feel like the assumed knowledge is your average American, while they might not be a giant sci-fi nerd like us, everyone to a degree has an assumed knowledge on the basis of Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like there's sort of going to be early on in my book, there's going to be a need to be like, and that's when Anakin Skywalker met Padme. Padme is the queen of Naboo, and Anakin Skywalker, a young boy who grew up on Tatooine. But at some point in the book, you aren't going to keep going back and explaining that. And that's really the premise of the entire book, is Star Wars is one of the most popular common grounds of culture that we have left in the world. And particularly as Americans, that like, you don't need to tell somebody too much about Luke Skywalker. We all know it's part of the popular culture.
Well, why'd you want to go with doing a book about this and not just an op-ed?
I've written op-eds. I mean, I've written dozens at this point of Star Wars op-eds, and they're informing the book. They're kind of going back, and I'm like taking like little ideas from different op-eds I've written and applying them to larger chapters. Like I wrote this one op-ed for the Federalist about cancel culture and whether or not Disney would allow Kylo Ren to pursue redemption. So I've done that essay, and I've incorporated it into the chapter. But the real reason I just like wanted to do the book was because I do this podcast called Beltway Banthas, and I've learned so many lessons from other Star Wars fans, left, right, and center, about how the franchise is viewed and internalized into people's moral compasses. And so I just wanted to do a book where I regurgitated the lessons that I've learned that have just made me really feel like Star Wars is still, despite everything, one of the great common grounds that we can share to talk about morality, good and evil, right and wrong, and not have things get too heated with politics.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel that the timing of your book is better now than probably, let's say like a year ago, because I can go through. So like you could always tell like who's in power, not by watching the news, not by voting, just by going through the Barnes and Noble current affairs section. Because during the Trump years, it was all books talking about how Russia stole the election and how Trump is going to get impeached. Now it's all about how Hunter Biden smokes Parmesan and why Kamala Harris should be in jail and all this other stuff. So it's really interesting because you've always got a lot of publishers putting out were really red meat topics for the partisan majority. So that way, as I feel, they can go ahead and make as much money as possible. But with your book, what you've done is you're trying to really tap down on what I feel is like the majority of Americans who might lean one way or another, but are politically apathetic and feel disenfranchised by, big conservative ink and big progressive ink and everything else. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to speak in a language that we all have a foundation on to kind of get people back to first principles.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better myself, and you should record an advertisement for my book because I have found I am really horrible at explaining the premise of my book and the why of it to people. I was on Matt Kibbe's Kibbe on Liberty last month, but they just released it today, and I remember he asked me in the interview, like, so why are you doing this book? And I was like, blah, 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 blah. Social fabric is ripped, and so you should be my advertisement guy. But yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true.
And speaking of which, I mean, it's not just the book that you have coming out this year. You've also started a new show with Al Jazeera called Rightly. When did that start? Because that kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it really did. So the show is called Right Now with Stephen Kent, a very, very creative title, and it's on a new network called Rightly. So Rightly.
Okay, I got them mixed up. Sorry,
it's okay. It's fine. Almost everybody thinks this, and that's totally fine. So the network itself is called Rightly, and it is a project by Al Jazeera. So Al Jazeera, international news network based out of Qatar, and they have several different properties within that umbrella of media that they produce. So they've got Al Jazeera International, they've got Al Jazeera English, then there's AJ Plus, which is sort of like an online YouTube and podcast centric American programming, very far left, very, very far left programming. And they wanted to do something that balances out their roster and shows that like they care about the intellectual traditions in America that exist on the right. Because, we are more than 50% of the population, people who might consider themselves to be conservatives, independents, or libertarians. So they are calling this thing Rightly, and I am the showrunner of the first show called Right Now. And it's a weekly YouTube show and podcast where I talk to young rising stars, Gen Z and millennial conservative and libertarians about where our movement is going and the future of the country.
Who do you feel is the target audience, though? Would you say
That's a great question.
Yeah, because I mean, for a program like this, and I've watched, some of the episodes so far that you've released, it's very much like you have to have an understanding of American politics for it. But the one thing that I think you as a host are good at are at least breaking things down so anybody can understand. So, like, I'm trying to think, if I were somebody watching this in like Europe or Asia or something, could I still understand it? And I think you passed the test with it. But I think that's the tricky thing about this type of programming. You gotta make sure that you're not talking past people, but you're not watering it down too much. You're trying to get that sweet middle spot.
Absolutely. And I would say that the audience, first of all, is American. I mean, Al Jazeera is an international brand, but rightly is a United States centric project. So it exists for anybody to be able to listen to it, but the intended audience is Americans. And then beyond that, the intended audience, as far as I see it, is not just like conservative Americans who like identify as Republicans or really like solidly conservative, because I really do believe that temperamentally, most Americans are conservative. Like we talk about this all the time with how the Democrats do not even understand or recognize the diversity of Black voters who align with the Democratic Party, but are far more conservative than rabid white liberals in their cohort, right? So a lot of people in America are small C conservative, but I really am like trying to do a show that appeals to the alienated majority who just do not feel that MSNBC and Fox News represent reality and the reality of our discourse, that like when we talk to our neighbors, this is what we think about each other and how we treat one another. Like, I really believe in the barstool American idea, or like we go to the bar and we talk and are kind to people. And it's like when we sit down with a Democrat or a Republican who we otherwise don't share anything with, we're cool. Like, we may like fight a little bit and argue, but like, it's cool. We can be friends. But you don't get that impression when you turn on cable news. And it's no surprise. Their audiences are very small. Like, their audiences are very small. And yet the entire country kind of like pulls each other's hair out over what happens on these networks that hardly anybody is really watching.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that gets all the waters muddied, so to speak. It's because we don't necessarily know where we're going with certain ideas. I mean, the way that I would describe a conservative today is almost different than how you would describe a conservative 10 years ago. And I think the same could apply for like, liberals in that sense. 10 years ago when Obama was just getting in, it was always, well, we don't want socialism. We just want everyone to make sure that they have health care. And we don't want to go ahead and take away your guns. We just want to go ahead and make sure that, criminals don't have access to them. Now it's capitalism has failed. Socialism is the answer, and give us your guns or we'll kill you.
And being conservative being conservative right now is like, I am against cancel culture. Like that is become. And
it's I am against cancel culture, but we should also nationalize Google. It's also one of those things where I'm just like, this is getting kind of weird, guys.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of one of those things where like we all knew that like the Republican Party was really into this like anti-PC thing, and I am too. I think that's really important to actually take that stand. But it has become like the defining issue, and it's going to reorder who considers themselves in 10 years to be Republicans. I think people who just want to speak freely, but we'll see. The Republican Party has their own ways of enforcing political correctness on people as well. So it is yet to be seen. I will say the one struggle I've had with the show is that I'm kind of a heady person. Like I only got a bachelor's degree in political science. I don't have like a master's in poli-sci and philosophy, but I sometimes struggle to kind of bring things a little bit down to earth and get out of my own way and just like being chill and being normal. So one of the things that I think people have commented on the show is like, it's still a little bit heady and needs to get down to earth a little bit more. Like I mentioned, like Barstool Sports, like those are like guys and like, Dave Portnoy, his network, like they like just say it how it is, say exactly what they're feeling. And I think most people recognize the way that they talk about the issues of the day. And I want to try to figure out like where that middle ground is, where I can kind of move closer to there, be more myself, but also kind of respect like the intellectual traditions that I care about. Because I got to know who my primary audience is, and that is conservatives and libertarians who care about the ideas.
going from doing your podcast to doing a show where you're actually on camera, was that also kind of a transition? Because I've always been one of those people where it's like my show will never be a video show because I've got a face for radio. The true purpose is you've got to do a lot more to be able to keep up with the standards and the expectations that people have. So I'm comfortable with this, but from going from a podcast to doing a show where, you know, you've got a live guest in front of you, you've got another guy on a screen, you've got your monologue segments and everything else. That just seems like a lot more work.
I feel right at home doing video first kind of TV style programming. It's kind of the same reason that I got into TV commentary and punditry, being a guest on people's shows in the first place is I'm just not really scared of looking directly into a camera and seeing teleprompter copy and having bright lights kind of shining on you. I was a theater kid growing up. I always wanted to be an actor. Like all these things kind of come together. So like one, like love of writing and expressing my ideas, a love of acting and presenting. It all kind of can come together to be like, I really love doing television. So sitting on set and doing a TV show, I actually find to be much more calming than alone with a microphone, trying to put my thoughts out through that medium. But I also did practice while I was primarily an op-ed writer and working with Young Voices, doing public relations. I was guest hosting public access shows in Arlington. So in Arlington, Virginia, there's a public access station, and it's where volunteers can like have their own TV programs. And
that's where my show, The Witching Hour, premieres out of.
Good for you. Yeah, that's awesome. So I would guest host on a public affairs show called the Square Circle. And so I would go on and I would practice moderating between different guests on a panel. I had to speak to a camera and read teleprompter copy. And I got my feet wet doing that for a year and a half. And when I heard about this opportunity with Al Jazeera to host the show, I just sent them my clips from that public access show, and it was enough. And now I'm doing the program. It feels great.
And sometimes that's all you need. I mean, the beautiful thing about public access, and I didn't know we were going to go this way, is that a lot of people think that it's an outdated form of getting to reach a mass audience. Almost everyone immediately goes in either podcasting or YouTube. But just to understand, you know, the technicalities of how a studio works, or having to work with a team of people, or having to work with like an actual producer and stuff. Like if you want to do this really professionally in that sense, there's no better outlet out there. And I know some libertarians might be like, but that's publicly funded. I know Fairfax Public Access, where we do things as well, it's in a partnership with Cox Cable. So almost no public funding goes towards that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. So if people are stuck on that, that's one thing. But at the same time, it's like, you know, it's like a library. The worst thing you could do is ignore it, because you're only going to benefit yourself if you take advantage of it.
Yeah, libertarians really need to get over themselves on that one. Like,
dude, I defend the library like on a regular basis, and I'm basically equated to Stalin.
Yeah, it's really, I think, not appalling, but I just think it's really drab to make that argument. I mean, when I spend time at the public access station, I'm surrounded by the area's weirdos, like, to be honest, like, and I say that lovingly, like the people who are in that building are just weird. Like they're socially awkward. Like, what the heck are you doing here? They're not going to like make it doing like television, but they have a dream and they want to work with cameras and they want to play with like teleprompter script and they want to practice like editing TV programs and have fun. And you can't do that at home doing a YouTube show. And this person might not ever make it actually pursuing it professionally. So like there are many ways that you can blow public dollars, but I don't think it's blowing it to give these people and just like artistic, technically interested people an opportunity to commune together and build and create something. It's not about government. Like, come on, public dollars, it's your money. It's a good use of it.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about J.J. Abrams. Do you like J.J. Abrams?
I hate J.J. Abrams.
Okay, so this will probably just solidify that. But you know, J.J. Abrams got his start in, I think, Miami public access.
Oh, cool.
It's just one of those things where it's like you don't know who's going to come from that. You really don't.
No, you don't. And, you know, and I was kind of like saying like, you know, at this public access station, a lot of people won't make it. Some people do. I mean, one of the favorite things that I've noticed is people I met on the public access show, I have had like 3 of them on now onto my YouTube and TV show as guests, because we all started there. So like you come up together as a community, and there are just a lot worse ways to bring people together who have like-minded interests than funding a public access station. And I'd like to see more stuff like that.
So my big question is, like, how do you balance all of this? Because you're a father, you have a day job, you're working on the book, you've got the new show going on. Like I'm, I don't have kids, I have less responsibilities, but even when I'm trying to balance all those things, it can get hectic sometimes. And while you don't look like you've been sleeping as much, you at least look like you're confident in your ability to maintain it all.
I perform under pressure and stress. I do better when I am out of my mind busy than when I am bored and don't have things to do. But that being said, like, you just got to assign certain things to certain times, really live on a planner. My book writing, so like I was trying to get up every day at like 5 a.m. and write until 7 when my daughter wakes up. And that was helpful. I would be able to knock out several hundred words at a time, but most of that time would be spent reading what I wrote the day before, right? Like we talked about earlier. And then it would be sort of incoherent if I only wrote for an hour. So what I have right now is Thursday is writing day, and I spend 9 hours writing, and then it's coherent and I get a lot of work put in. So you just got to assign certain times to certain things and be disciplined. Right now, I am playing hooky from my job to talk to you, but that's okay. The wonderful thing about being in media creation and media and content creation is this is, kind of part of the job.
It overlaps. It does.
There's a little overlap there.
If you could go back and tell yourself, like maybe 5 years ago, that this would be all the stuff you were doing, how would you tell yourself to prepare for it?
Absolute insanity. Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't expecting you to ask, like, how would I tell myself to prepare for it? I will say the thing that I'm glad that I did at all, which set me on this path that I am on, book deal, hosting this show with Al Jazeera International, still doing Young Voices PR, doing television. This is all because I started a stupid podcast. Like, I was a social media manager, very unhappy with my job, and I wanted to learn new skills. And so I wanted to do a Star Wars podcast where I interview people about their love of Star Wars. And it turned into a thing. Like, people liked it. And it's not even a huge show, but enough people watched it that there was like some social proof. And it just kept leading to more opportunities. So side hustles is why I am in this position. So what would I tell myself to prepare for this moment? That's the one I don't know how to answer, besides that I wish I had more education. Like, I just wish I had more degrees, but at the same time, degrees wouldn't have gotten me here in the first place. They would just make me feel more confident, and maybe sometimes be able to get past my imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I mean that's one of those areas where it's like I've thought of that. Like if I could go back, like Arnie from the Terminator, but not naked. When I go back in time and like tell younger Remso that you need to do this, and this to prepare for it, I don't feel like I would have anything to say, because I've gotten everywhere I have, good, bad, and different, because I was just at a certain place at the right time. And ultimately, in everything that we're doing, like I get a lot of young, like near the end of their undergrad college students, like email me, and they might be like, I want to be a content creator. What should I do? And what I tell them is like, I've got my college degree, but I'm a proud YTU grad. And they're like, what's YTU? And I'm like, YouTube University. If you want to figure it out, you could YouTube it or Udemy or something. It's one of these things where it's like, especially in the multimedia creator field, whether you're getting into podcasting, writing, doing, filmmaking, anything like this, there really is no set path. There really is no start here, do this, and you will get there by here. It's a lot of weird things and little side adventures and stuff you've got to figure out. And ultimately, you're never going to feel super confident about it, but just by continuing to pursue it, you're going to go ahead and see that compounding effect of time, experience, and knowledge over time.
Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. I think one of the things that I struggle with is I have a tendency to say yes to a lot of different things. People want me to do this, I'll say yes. People want me to do that, I say yes. My neighborhood, a couple of people in my block want to like take on the housing, the HOA, and I'm looped into that now too.
Become the HOA president, Stephen. That is your calling.
I'm working on it, man. But no, I think one of the things that you have to do is be disciplined about which things you say yes to. And at some point, you have to say no to stuff if it doesn't fit into the other things that you're doing. So if like you get an opportunity to take on a new thing, what is the reason that you're doing it? And does it fold into your other goals and aspirations? But if it's going to take away from the things that create value in your life and make your life easier by making you things like money, you might need to say no. And it's not mean to do it. It's actually sometimes respectful to the person who you ask to be realistic about your limitations. And so I'm currently trying to decide whether or not I'm going to do the board of advisors for this nonprofit out in Hollywood focused on entertainment ethics. And I initially had said no, but now I'm like, oh, I kind of want to say yes because it folds into what I'm doing with the book. And if it can help me sell the book, in a place like Hollywood, that could be really good. So like these are all questions that you have to ask when you're prioritizing what things you do.
Or you could take over your HOA and make everyone's life around you better.
Yeah, or I could spend my time on neighborhood politics, being a little tyrant.
Hey man, if you're not in charge of the HOA, somebody else is. That's the one thing.
You're absolutely right.
As I'm moving, that's the one thing I'm looking forward to not having to hear about anymore. It's the HOA and the fact that they don't like lawn clippings put out on a certain day, or they don't like the color of the solar lights. Apparently we have to dim them down to a yellow instead of a blue because that bothers somebody. Yeah, it's like, man, go fuck yourself. But Stephen, we covered a lot of ground in a very short amount of time. Thank you for coming on. If people want to go ahead and keep up and catch up with all your projects and everything you're doing, how could they do so?
So there's so many links. So I'll give you one where I kind of talk about all of these things. My Substack, my newsletter, where I'm kind of updating not only on my book, but also on the YouTube show and my writings, politicizeme.substack.com. That's politicizeme.substack.com. Would really, really, really love if you'd subscribe, kind of check out the writings and get caught up on some of the projects I'm working on.
Awesome stuff. Stephen, Kent, always a blast. We need to get a beer before I leave.
Wait, where are you going?
I am moving to Milwaukee on the 27th.
I didn't know you were leaving. I knew you got a new job, but I didn't know you were going. When do you go?
I leave on the 27th.
Okay. All right. So, we're going to have more than one beer before you go.
I am totally cool with that. I am just here. I start work technically this Monday. By the time people hear this, people won't care. But yeah, it's a few weeks of remote work to get started. And then it's the big move because I got to become a Wisconsin resident to work at my new place, the Badger Institute, which is a free market think tank based out of Milwaukee. So I
don't support you leaving, but I'm excited for your new opportunity.
I appreciate it, man. You've been a great friend and somebody I've been able to rely on for advice. And I hope that we've worked on a ton of stuff together in the past. I hope we can continue to do so as friends and as colleagues.
Thanks, Remso.
All right, guys. Well, it costs you nothing, but it means the world to me. A 5-star rating and review, folks, on Apple Podcasts. You know the deal. Be safe. Be good. Good night.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com, like The Chris Spangle Show, Liberty Explained, The Brian Nichols Show, The Boss Hog of Liberty, Freedom Strips with Keaton Tucker, On the Run with Remso Martinez, Gingerarchy with Tricia Stewart-Mann, Upward, Libertarian Activism, and Now Hear This. Tune in now and we're going to help you sound smarter when talking with your friends.